Hey guys, today I'm going to talk to y'all about something that is one of my most favorite activities in the world, and that is surf fishing at the Padre Island National Seashore, and basically everything you need to know to get started fishing at PINS, which is short for Padre Island National Seashore. I got started doing this about 2010 when my wife and I moved to Port Aransas, Texas, and I knew absolutely nothing about it other than it looked like a lot of fun. I made a ton of mistakes along the way. I bought a lot of the wrong gear, targeted some of the wrong species, went on bad days. But what I'm hoping to share with you today is some of the mistakes I made and how I corrected that so that you can have a successful trip on a vacation if you decide to go. One other thing before we get going, I don't want this to be a lecture. If there are questions along the way, if you have any comments or want to know anything about any of the pictures you see, just raise your hand and ask me. I'll be happy to ask. And it's not clicking.
Yeah, because it's line of sight, so.
Can you just advance the slide for me? Hit the right arrow button. Objectives today. One of the things what I've learned from teaching is I'm going to tell you what we're talking about. We're going to talk about it, and I'm going to tell you what we talked about so that it's very clear what we're doing. Objectives today. We're going to learn about the joy of surf fishing. We're going to learn how to have a successful fishing trip. We're going to learn about the necessary tools and equipment. We're going to learn some different techniques. We're going to learn about safety and safety issues when surf fishing, and most importantly, we're going to have fun. Next slide, please. I actually use this principle when I teach a Foreman Development series. It's timers, and it applies to everything that you will do in life, basically. Tools, information, materials, expectations, recognition, and safety. Anything you embark on, any project you have, any activities you do, it will come down to that, to that acronym. It always plays out with it. Is this my new one? Okay, good. Here we go. Don't have a little laser dealy too? We'll see. But it comes down to that. Just to get into this, I want to talk about this fish here. This was actually one of my first successes surf fishing in Texas. We had just moved in there, and I had all the wrong gear. This fish actually broke my reel, and I still managed to land it. But I had seen some pelicans crashing some bait, and it was freezing. I had no waders. I had no way to do this. The water temperature was probably about 60 degrees. I walked out to where the second row of breakers was and flung a bait out there and caught that fish. And I will tell you, as cold as I was when it happened, you can see the smile on my face. I didn't care. It was awesome. That was one of my first successes. But it gets back to I had a lot of the wrong gear for this. Tools. Basic tools you're going to need to have a successful trip, especially if you want to fish the Padre Island National Seashore. You need a truck or a four-wheel drive vehicle. There is a great big sign as you get on the 5-mile marker at the National Seashore. Beware, four-wheel drive only. The reason is the sand gets soft, you can get stuck. I have indeed been stuck. It's not fun. The other thing you're going to need is you need a pass to the national park. It's about 20 bucks, 24 bucks. Gets you access to the park for the entire year. Some other tools you're going to need. You need a hat because the sun does get hot. I mean, I am one that doesn't burn. I tan, but it's still, you need that protection. Extra clothes because you're going to get wet. You're going to get sand on you. Beach towels. A camera, as you can see, is very important. Chairs to sit on. Rods, reels, terminal tackle, which is your leaders and your weights and your hooks. I always bring 2 ice chests. I have one for fish and bait because I do not like to mix stinky with what I want to eat or drink. I like them kept separate. If you fish with live bait, obviously you need bait, but if you're going to fish with live bait, you need a bait tank and a bubbler to keep your bait fresh and alive. First aid and emergency kit. You are going to, first off, when you're down at the National Seashore, there's no cell phone signal, there's no McDonald's, there's no red lights. You are in the wilderness. You are quite literally on your own. So you have to be able to deal with anything that comes your way, including large predatory fish. I mean, there are sharks out there, there are snakes out there, there are hogs, there's all manner of wildlife out there. I mentioned having a four-wheel drive vehicle. Shovel and boards are very, very, very critical. You get stuck, no one's coming to help you. You're going to have to unstick your truck or you're going to be sucked out by the tide. Other thing, miscellaneous items, kind of depending on location, time of year. My wife will always tell you this, you better bring a roll of toilet paper or I'm not going. Those are your basic tools to go get started. Information. You can go haphazardly as I did, and you may find the water conditions terrible, you may find the wind terrible, you might go out there and find such seaweed that it's impossible to fish. But fishing reports are key. I've got 3 websites that may be a little difficult to see, but corpusfishing.com, Magic Seaweed, Local News, and Intellicast. Corpusfishing.com is a local fishing forum. People that go, they will tell you, what they caught, where they caught it, what they were using. As sometimes they lie, as fishermen are wont to do. MagicSeaweed.com is actually a website for surfers. And they have a surf report and a tide report from all over the world, but they can get very specific to your area. And one of them is the Bob Hall Pier. Apparently surfing is a big deal in South Texas. But I know what the wave forecasts are going to be. I know whether the waves are going to be tall or I know whether the waves are going to be small, so it helps me gear up or gear down accordingly. KIII-TV gives me just local news. And Telecast gives me an excellent 24-hour, hour-by-hour weather forecast, so I will know which direction the wind is blowing. I'll know at what times of day that it's going to change. And that is critical to success when you're fishing. The tide movements. Having a moving tide is huge, whether it's incoming or outgoing. Everything in the Gulf is based on the tides. If you've got no tide, a lot of times you may as well go play golf or do something else that day. I talked about the surf forecast with Magic Seaweed. The moon phase, full moon, you're going to waste your time. Those fish are going to feed all night unless you want to fish at night, and they're going to kind of be inactive during the day. But when you've got a waning moon or a lesser moon, you're going to have success. Another thing is reading the water. A lot of people don't understand how what you're looking for. When you're looking at the surf, it all just looks like waves are crashing. My rule of thumb is very simple. If there's something different, I'm going to stop and fish it. But there are certain things you will look for. And then lastly, or I'm sorry, not lastly, get a driving report. I actually completely destroyed a near brand new truck going to Penns because I didn't. The driving conditions were terrible. It was very soft. It was very bumpy. I ingested a lot of sand in my truck, and it took a lot of money to get it repaired. But if you call the national park, they'll tell you, yes, the sand is soft, or no, the sand is hard packed, or there's certain areas. They'll give you a very good driving report so that you know what you're getting into. And then the other thing is take a casting class. A close friend of mine owns Breakaway Tackle in Corpus Christi, Texas. Every Wednesday morning, he goes to the beach. He has a section of the beach that's wide open, and he will teach people how to cast with a long surf rod. And it's intimidating to see a 10 or 12-foot surf rod not knowing what you're doing. And then by the end of the class, a couple hours, he'll have you throwing a weight between 400 and 500 feet, sometimes longer. Any questions so far? Materials, rods and reels. I use 2 basic setups. I use a spinning reel. I usually use a 4,000 size reel. I hold about 300 yards worth of line on there. I use an 8-foot medium action rod. I use this to throw lures and spoons at fish that I'll see up close. My other setup is my casting rods. And I'm a big fan of Daiwa reels. I find them to be very easy to cast, but in addition, they're very tough. There's a lot of salt in the air. There's a lot of sand. No matter how careful you are going to drop a reel in the sand. And you can take those reels and rinse them off with a bottle of water, and they're as good as new. They just take a beating and keep going. They're also very long casting, which is sometimes critical to reaching where the fish are. The weights, as you can see right there, they're not your typical pyramid sinkers. That we call those Sputniks or spider weights. What we like to do is I like to cast a bait out and get that weight anchored into the ground. And what I will do is I'll put the rod in the rod holder and crank the reel down until it takes all the stretch out of the line so that it's like a mouse trap. When a fish hits it, all that stretch comes out and it sets the hook for you, and you basically got your fish on. But it also holds the bait in place when the currents are moving, when the waves are big. It's a great benefit. I was expecting to have a larger screen, but that's a picture of a typical leader. I've got a length of wire on there. It's kind of hard to see. That's for creatures with teeth. I've lost some leaders because I tend not to use those sometimes. But yeah, I've used those to catch sharks and king mackerel and other species with sharp teeth. And then there's my bait tank. I use that to keep live mullet or live shrimp in. That's my basic materials to go fish with. Expectations. I go out there expecting to catch a lot of fish. But a lot of it depends on the time of year, and I'll give you kind of a go around the year as we're looking at here. That first picture at the top was actually caught right around Thanksgiving a few years ago. It was 85 degrees outside. That's about a 30-pound Jack Crevalle, which is basically synonymous for hooking onto a torpedo. Those are a lot of fun. They're no good to eat. They're oily. They stink. But they are voracious fighters, and they're a lot of fun. That fish there is a wintertime fish that my wife caught. It's a black drum at the top right. Delicious, fantastic eating. That was probably a couple of months later, or a month or so later. This is early spring. It was also my wife with a speckled trout or a spotted sea trout. She caught that with using a completely different technique. These two were caught dead sticking. So you can see on the bottom, just anchoring a piece of bait on the bottom. The bottom two fish were caught using lures or plugging. In fact, you can see a plug hanging from the fish there, but those are both speckled trout. That was a spring, that was in the summer, late summer. In fact, that was exactly about a year right before Harvey hit our area. So time of year, which species do you want to look for? I really like to go look for speckled trout and black drum and pompano. Those are the ones I enjoy chasing, mainly because they're very good to eat. Jacks are fun just to catch. They're something to do when there's nothing else going on. Sometimes matching the hatch or what bait is available. If there's mullet moving, you're going to want to throw lures. You're going to want to use a cast net and catch bait. Plugging versus dead sticking. My wife is a setup shop. Don't move, stay there, and we're going to let the fish come to us. I'm a little less patient. I have a 10 cast rule. If I make 10 casts and nothing happens, I'm in my truck and I'm moving down the beach. That's kind of how I do things. She does not like to go fish with me when I do that. It's the way it is. This is the fun part. This is recognition. This is where you get to kind of brag about what you've caught. Pictures and photos, social media, the internet, that fishing forum I talked about at corpusfishing.com. Having your phone with you, even though it doesn't work, they take great pictures. This is a massive redfish my wife caught on the pier not far from the house. And it has actually appeared in several local newspaper and magazine ads promoting tourism for the area, which we were kind of surprised to find out. We learned you need to watermark your photos. But the story about her catching this, we actually had gone all day without catching a single fish. And I had 2 rods out, and I caught one fish, and the other rod went slack, and I said, hey, go get that. And when she started reeling it up and it got tight, it was a big redfish, and she ended up having about a 45-minute, hour-long fight to bring that in. And then we made everybody crazy because we snapped a bunch of pictures and then let it go. Everybody's like, why would you throw a big fish like that back? But that's kind of what you do. Safety. This may be controversial for some people to think, but I absolutely insist that you carry a gun and 2 reloads with you when you go down there. I've been by myself down there, and I've had people that I have no idea what their intentions are. I have had illegal aliens come up asking me for a ride and get pretty pointed about it. There's wild animals out there. You've got to be kind of prepared to deal with anything that comes your way. A first aid kit and a tourniquet is absolutely important. There are large sharks out there. I've seen some of them up close and personal when I'm fishing. And a bite or a sting or something from that is absolutely critical to be able to treat it. Stingrays are real, jellyfish are real, which brings me to why you should wear shoes. I do not go in the surf barefooted. I got popped by a stingray, and it was 3 months of antibiotics and really painful. But yeah, absolutely wearing shoes. Something else I like to talk about is I call it witching hour. When I go fish, I have a pretty hard rule. I do not go in the water until the sun is completely rise in the morning. The reason is when the sun is coming up, the light is refracted in the water, and basically prey fish are unable to see as well, and the predators are able to see, namely big sharks. And they've come in close. One particular instance, I had caught a nice redfish. I was standing feet dry, and as I was unhooking the fish, I saw some movement to about my 11 o'clock. And there was a dorsal fin, and about 6 feet behind it was a tail sticking out. It was a big, about an 8-foot-long bull shark right there, and 3 feet of water right in front of me. I was like, "You're the reason I don't go in the water in the morning." I mentioned the boards and the shovel. I did stick myself one time in the sand. Despite being pretty experienced four-wheel drive user, off-roader, I got stuck. It took me 5 hours to get undone. And the reason it took so long was I left my boards at home. I had to walk down the beach for a couple of miles until I found some that washed up to get out. So have that stuff with you. And then lastly, have a flight plan. Because you are remote, when I go by myself, I will tell my wife, I'm going down to this mile marker and not past. And she knows to tell me, text me when you get back so that I don't have to come looking for you. And the rule is, if she doesn't hear from me by a certain time, she's coming to get me. Something's happened. Any questions? I just want to mention some of my websites I've used: Corpus Fishing, Magic Seaweed, KIII-TV, and Intellicast. And then actually our own Facebook page is facebook.com/penspals. And I've got one fish story before I go. And I can talk to you about some of the things you look for. This fish, if you look here and you can see where the waves break here and the waves break here, those are where your sandbars are. And they run up and down the coast for basically miles. I saw this guy cruising in this area in between. So what I did was I sped my truck up and got in front of him, and I waited for him, and I threw that lure in front of him as he came by. And when he grabbed it, the fight was on. And I mentioned how much line that reel holds. His first run left me with about 50 yards of line. It took me about 45 minutes to bring him in. Took some pictures, let it go. It was awesome. So with that, I'll conclude my presentation. Yes?
Ryan, just curious, what's a fish like that weigh?
That fish there is probably between 25 and 30 pounds. And there are tricks to taking pictures. I should have mentioned this in my photos. It's called forced perspective. You'll notice my wife, that picture of that redfish, she held her hands way out. Her fish was about 25 pounds, but it looks like it's about 40. If you catch a redfish or a speckled trout or a jack, like I will hold it at an angle, and that's the old fisherman lie and fisherman lie even more. But yeah, that's about a 25 or 30 pound fish. They make great shark bait, believe it or not, at that size. That ought to give you an idea of some of the predators that do swim out there. Any other questions? Yes.
So is that typically how you would approach a fish like that? Is try to get a lure out to it? Do you see them out there?
Sometimes. It depends what I'm doing. I mentioned the difference between plugging and dead sticking. Plugging is very active fishing, and that's where I get I don't like to be there for more than 10 casts. These guys, you will normally see them coming. To say they're a violent fish would be an understatement. You will see bait fish scattering. You'll see fish jumping to get out of their way. And when you see them coming, you can make a sight cast at them. But it also goes down to some of the things I look for. Like I said, fish jumping. If I see bait move or I see a break in the water, I'll stop and make a cast at it. And a lot of times those have produced fish for me.
So you're just driving?
Sometimes.
Do you see that? Sometimes.
Yeah. I'll also look for certain things in the water. I could spend a whole hour discussing reading the water alone. But I will look for, if you've ever seen the rip current warning signs, where it has like a trough and a big mushroom on the top, we call that a suckback. If I see one of those, I will stop and fish that. I don't care where it is. Because what happens is bait fish get sucked into that riptide just like a person does, and they're out of control, and predator fish will hang on the outside of that and feed. So I'll put a bait or two or throw some lures around the top of that, and more often than not produce fish.
Field trip.
Yeah.
Just say when. And I will tell you, September to mid-November is prime fishing time. Absolute prime. It's 80 degrees. The water temperature is still 70 degrees. Those guys are all over the place. And what's really cool is when you find 3 or 4 of them together and they start competing to try to catch your lure. It's pretty cool. All right.